here's the new engine. Well, new to me anyway. Though I think it's been in more than one car. Been replaced more than once because that's old paint. And most of the time, junkyards will mark them like that. And I know that the valve cover's been off because somebody used the orange fake squishy gasket crap. We all know how I feel about that. Anyway, if you've seen my old videos. I also can tell that the head gasket has been replaced because it's the multi-layered steel gasket instead of the crappy graphite one that was known to fail on these. Now, the junkyard that pulled this for me wasn't exactly gentle. That's not the shape that's supposed to be. But I got the crank sensor, the oil pressure sensor. Well, that coil pack is destroyed. I have to replace it. But the EGR valve, not the solenoid, just the valve. Front engine mount, crankshaft. It's almost a complete engine. I mean, they left some stuff off, or they took some stuff off. And they broke the power steering reservoir. There's supposed to be a little nipple right there, as you can see. They gave me another power steering bracket, which I don't need because I've got one. Same with the AC, because I don't have AC. But yeah, this is the typical yank and cut. They really didn't have much care with this, and I understand that, well, I showed up before they'd even started pulling it because I got tired of waiting. Yes, I can be impatient, but hey, $150 for an engine, well, $161 and change. I want my damn engine. I'm tired of this car sitting around not moving. They did start this thing before they gave it to me, which I really, really wish they hadn't. Cars don't do well when they're sitting forever and they don't change the oil before they start them. So they could have damaged this. I don't know. They didn't do a compression test on it. Yeah, there's all sorts of things that I'm not particularly enthused about. But for $150, I got a running engine. One that I know I can put in the car after I strip down some of the crap that they left. And I'll be driving this thing again, finally. Well, that thing. This thing still moves. That's how I went and got it. But yeah, I guess I'm glad to see that they left this end on here, because that means that I can cut the hard plastic tubing off of there and add it to the Teflon coated rubber line that I've got, so that I can actually clamp this on like it's supposed to be instead of using hose clamps. Got all the injectors in the fuel rail. That's nice. Manifold absolute pressure sensor and manifold temperature sensor. They're all nice and clean, although there is plenty of grime on this engine. It doesn't look like it's had too much of an oil leak. Doesn't have the typical waterfall of oil coming down from the camshaft sensor, although they did destroy the temperature sensor, but that one's probably been in there for quite some time and needed to be replaced anyway. I'm probably just going to reuse these headlines and hard lines instead of unbolting them. I tied a bag over the throttle body as I was driving down the road because I didn't want to get it full of water, because it's been raining today. Yay! That's kind of what I wanted to do, or why I wanted to get the engine as soon as possible, because I wanted to beat the rain. Didn't happen. I'm glad to see that I got a new oil cap, because the one that was on the old engine is destroyed, as well as a new oil dipstick. Thermostat housing, basically they didn't take much off of this engine. So hopefully it will be mostly plug and play. There is a possibility that the crankshaft sensor is going to be a different plug on there, but they gave me enough wire there, I think, that I can just splice onto the wiring harness that's on the car or swap it over. With these, if the crankshaft sensor isn't broken, you're better off swapping the wiring, because they're very easy to break pulling out. They have a rubber O-ring seal on them that likes to fuse to the block over time, because with heat cycles, rubber will vulcanize and somehow become an adhesive, and it's all sorts of problems I don't want to deal with. So what I'm going to be doing is taking off all of the rubber hoses that they left that I don't need, which there aren't a whole hell of a lot. Taking off this cover that goes over the alternator because they bent the hell out of it, and I've got another one. And I'll probably swap over my power steering reservoir and keep that cap because it's cleaner. And I'm probably going to drop this in with my cherry picker. I do have one, in case you were wondering from the last 2 videos. I do have a cherry picker, I just don't have it put together, and I don't particularly care for using them if I don't have to, because they're just... I've run myself over with them a few times. I've run into situations where they don't fit between the front wheels, and there's a very good possibility that I will have the same problem here, because I've got this on a ramp instead of on an engine or a jack stand. I didn't clean the engine compartment. I know I should have, but I didn't. Yeah, there's just all sorts of things. There's the old engine. I got it covered with a bag because I didn't want to get a whole bunch of water in it in case I needed it for a core, which I don't. And this car does have an ABS module. I've taken it off and cleaned it before because it was... The front brake lines had collapsed, both of them on this car. And this was back before I knew that the rubber lines could collapse on the inside and prevent brake fluid from flowing back towards the reservoir. So, yeah, I thought that might be the issue. That wasn't. Both brake lines have been replaced. Both rotors have been replaced. It's got new brake pads on the front, although it probably needs new ones, given how long it's been and how hard it's been driven, and just all sorts of different things. I mean, this is a project car. I am not planning to make it as fancy as possible, but every time I feel like making a video or trying out something new that I haven't done before, this will probably be the car that it happens on if it's around that long. There was an incident with a deer where somehow the deer's head caught on the antenna and its ass hit there, and then it spun around and hit there, and just, yeah. The door's still open, they still work, but this car is not pretty. And a lot of you are probably wondering, well, why am I bothering to put so much time and effort into something like this? Well, that's easy. I don't know how well it's going to show up on the camera, but the body is not rusted out. There is some surface rust, but because this thing has been leaking so much oil and so much power steering fluid over the years, the body underneath is solid. It's all there. And anyone who's owned a Minneapolis car knows that's not very common. This car did come from around the Twin Cities area. The people I bought it from, they had a problem with the car continually dying. They could drive for a while, and then when they go to stop, it would die. Or when they idled it, it would die, when you put it in park or whatever. And they couldn't figure it out, so they sold it to me for $400, and I brought it up here for the woman who eventually ended up having it for a long while. And turns out it was the intake air temperature sensor. Yeah. That and the compression on the engine is why this thing did not want to stay running. But I unplugged the intake air temperature sensor, and the car ran for 3 years. That was it. One time it had problems starting after that, and that was when I threw on the throttle body and the intake tube, because that was the throttle position sensor, and I didn't have an air filter for it, and it was like, screw it. So I grabbed an intake, or the intake tube that I had with the pod filter on there from a different car that I had already scrapped, and threw it on there. Yes, I did have it sitting around, I know. I'm not quite a hoarder, but I've got a lot of parts for Neons, and that's going to come in handy, because one of the things that I did have lying around from one of my old Neons is this engine mount. This is the one that came off the car, and while it's not completely destroyed, it is separated inside, so it's not going to hold as well as it should. It's not going to fly out, because this here is metal. This around this perimeter is metal. So it's designed to stay in place even if the rubber fails. Whereas this one, the steel is all still there. It is separated, but not a whole lot. But it has the inserts in it. And these are really, really dirty, so you're not going to be able to see them. Sorry, I'm not paying attention to the camera. You can kind of see it on this side. This red stuff here, this is polyurethane. This stiffens these bushings up like you wouldn't believe. This is the passenger side mount. I can't find my front one because I showed you in the other video how bad that one is. But for now, that's what I'm going to use. And yeah, I need to throw that can away. That's been sitting there for a while. But otherwise, yeah, this is all of the parts that I took off of my engine before I started the swap. So I've got a power steering reservoir, a power steering pump, alternator. Let's see, where is it? There it is. That cover that's not all bent to hell like it is on the new engine. Spare EGR valve. Spare brackets. Thankfully, I did not need another oil air separator box. The one on the car is still good from the looks of it. So yeah, there's some goods in getting an engine from a scrapyard because you can usually end up with spares as long as they don't care. If it's not a brand new engine where they can get money for every single piece on the car, you're better off. This one isn't broken. There's a nut stuck down here. I don't know what the hell that came off of quite at the moment, but I will find out eventually. This tube here is that one that you saw sticking up on the other oil air separator that goes to the intake. I don't know why they need two different sources going to the intake, but they do, so that will have to be hooked up. But yeah, that's what I'm working with right now, and I know this is a really long intro and I'm babbling on about everything, but I don't know how much of the reinstallation I'm going to show. I just wanted to get this out of the way and covered so that there is an opening to the final part of the video, if I can get this to upload in one part. The first part, the removal, would have been one part, but YouTube didn't like it and my video editor didn't like it, so editing program, didn't like it, so it was in two parts. This one hopefully will be one, so I better shut up and start working. Well, it's in the hole. Motor mounts are bolted up, and yes, I used the one with the polyurethane insert on here, but I couldn't find my other one. And I know it's really hard to see, and everything's grainy, but it's 8:50 right now. So, yeah, it's dark outside. This camera doesn't really show it very well. But yeah, that's why it's so grainy, because it's adjusting for that. But I haven't really hooked any hoses or anything up. The only thing that's really connected right now is the engine mounts, and they are actually attached. I still haven't even bolted up the torque converter. So yeah, that's one of the things I get to do, and I'll probably continue working on this for a little while tonight. But I don't have any engine oil, and they gave me this thing bone dry. I'm really hoping that they didn't start it bone dry, but the thermostat housing had rust in it, and it had no evidence of fluid at all, so I'm guessing that it was empty, or at least very low, because some did drain out from the lower radiator hose when I put the engine in and tilted it, but otherwise, yeah. I heard it run, fairly sure it was this engine, and it looks very clean, doesn't look like it's been overheated, and you can usually tell because the paint will be flicking off of the valve cover. The paint that is flecking off of the block, well, that's probably because it's 20-something years old. This is a 1995 Dodge Neon, and the engine casting actually says 4-20-94, I believe. So this engine might have been built in 94, for all I know. Well, first built. The block was from 94. Everything else, it has been taken apart, at least to some extent, so it very well could have been rebuilt within the last 2 years, for all I know. I am going to have to change the coil pack because they broke it. But I've got a spare one, in fact. I've got a spare bunch of stuff. Throttle body, oil air separator, various brackets, spare thermostat housing. Let's see, where is it? There it is. It's for thermostat housing. So yeah, and I'm not going to put the AC condenser back in. There's no point. I'm not going to hook the AC up, and if I decide to repair the AC system, I got to clean the crap out of the, I don't know what it is. The thing inside the car that makes it cold. Give me a break. I'm tired, I'm sore, I've been going for a while. Took me probably an hour and a half to get this engine back in since I got home because I had to put this thing together. It's an engine hoist, by the way, Harbor Freight POS, but it worked. And I am much further along than I would be if I had stripped it down to stuff it up from beneath. But you can do both. You can take it out from the top, you can put it in from the top, you can take it out from the bottom, you can put it in from the bottom. I showed you, well, I didn't show you anything, but I've sort of explained and given you a somewhat of an idea of how you can do that. And now I'll be putting it back together the rest of the way, and I'll pick this video up tomorrow when I can actually start it. So, I guess, until then. Well, here we are on day 2 of the install. I worked until probably about 11:30 last night before I decided to pack it in. Only had this one light here to work by, and that's not easy when you're working on this side of the engine. Down in the engine compartment, didn't even bother grabbing a trouble light because, well, I've done so many of these I can almost do them with my eyes closed. I can definitely do them in the dark. Haven't hooked the exhaust up yet. There's a couple of sensors on the back I still haven't hooked up. Still haven't done the fuel line. Hooked the throttle and the detent up for the transmission, but I haven't hooked the cruise control solenoid back up. It never worked anyway, so I'm not even sure I'm going to bother with it. Swapped over the coil pack. And yeah, these things are kind of known for the spark plug tubes starting to leak, but thankfully, this one, they're all bone dry. So, whoever did the valve cover, at least got those right. Got most of this front end put back together. Thought I had a spare starter, but I don't. I've got a spare starter for, I think, a Navajo. Yeah, that old red beater that I used to have. Got the EGR all hooked up and ready to go. I'm kind of trying to do this a little bit cleaner than I did the other one. Other ones, I should say, that I've done. This one, it's actually got these wire loom holder things, so I used them. But yeah, today basically we'll be putting the rest of it together, changing the oil filter, dumping oil in it, and hopefully getting it running and moving. I also still have to replace these transmission cooler lines, but, well, that's going to take all of 2.5, 3 minutes, maybe. So yeah, this is where I got last night. And yeah. So I guess if anybody ever needs me to work on one of these things in the dark, depending on what's wrong, I probably could. But that's what comes with knowing a car, working on them so many times or for so long that you just get in the habit and know what to do. That's why specialized technicians can knock out, certain repair jobs on a car in half the time it would take anybody else, because they've just done it so many times. They know exactly what to do. They know all the little tricks and tips, and yeah. Anyway, I'm going to get this thing further along. I'm going to go run and get those cooler lines, and transmission fluid. Not sure if I want to start with the radiator or if I want to finish up the back of the car. But that will come as soon as I make up my mind. So anyway, that's where we are right now. As I walked past it, I figured I'd grab it and show you guys. This is one of the ways that you can spot the difference between a 95 and a 96 just at a quick glance. Other than the oil-air separator, the location of the coil pack, because it bolts directly to the valve cover, this EGR2 or this PCV tube here, as well as this PCV tube in the back. This one is the one that goes to the intake. This is the one that goes to the air tube that comes from the throttle body to the air filter. This is the one that goes to the intake manifold. But yeah, you can see the differences between the two, and yes, that one has definitely been overheated. Just at a quick glance, you can easily tell a 95 from a 96. Just right away. So, yeah, the more you know. Okay, radiator's in. Tranny cooling lines have been replaced. I guess you can kind of see. There you go. They're not the old crusty, nasty ones anymore. Swapped over that fuel line end and trimmed down the fuel hose so it's not quite as long. I've got a bit of extra. So yeah, I've got the burp tank for the radiator, the battery box, sensors on the back of the engine, the exhaust, the O2 sensors, the torque converter, and the lower bell housing bolts to do, which I haven't done because it's still very, very wet here. But I figured now would be the perfect time to break this out. I have literally had this sitting in my basement for years. Never had an instance to use it because I never worked on a car on this concrete pad. I've had the pad for years. Never worked on it because, well, I never really had a call to. But now, I'm finally going to give this thing a shot. This is a Harbor Freight creeper. Ooh, breaking the seal. We all know how people love those unboxing videos and crap. It's kind of hard to do one-handed. Hanging on the wheels. But yes. Ooh. Brand new, really old creeper. It's got a headrest and pockets for tools and bolts. I don't know if this would classify as an unboxing video. Probably get more views if I tag it that way. But yeah. Now I get to roll underneath on this rocky ass ground and see about getting this engine done. Okay, battery's in, oil's filled up, exhaust is hooked up, air filter's on, radiator's full, I think. I didn't fill the oil filter before I put it on. You can do that, I didn't. But in that case, you just dump 4 quarts into the engine if it's bone dry. At the very least, 4 quarts. I know there was oil in this because when I did change the filter, it kind of puked at me, so it's got good pressure. But right now, I'm going to disconnect the fuel injectors. I've got the ignition on right now. I don't know if you can hear that high-pitched whine or not. That's what that is. But, and then I'm going to disconnect the coil. And then I'm going to use my makeshift remote starter here to crank the engine over. I've got it hooked up to the truck with its much bigger battery because I know this battery is practically shot. But here we go, we're going to crank it. I'm just moving oil through the engine to make sure that everything is lubricated for when I fire it up the first time. I don't want to burn up the starter, obviously. But, okay. Now, as long as the fuel pump is any good and the gasoline that was in it is any good. Speaking of which, I should probably check the Schrader valve. We got fuel! Fuel pump works. Yay. Now I get to play with sparks next to gasoline as it evaporates. Hurrah! Plug the coil pack back in. Alright. Well, wow, that gasoline smells a lot like lacquer. Anyway, moment of truth. Will it run? Wunderbar! Wow. There we go. That sounds better. Wow, yeah. That rattle at startup kind of had me nervous, but smooth out right away. That is beautiful. It's got a knock, but then again, these always have knocks for some reason after about 100,000 miles. They have a hydraulic adjuster in the end of the rocker arm, and for some reason that always seems to freeze into the rocker arm, and then it gets a knock. And this does sound a lot like a lifter knock to me. This has a 60-day warranty on the engine, and I've more or less documented the installation. So they can't say I didn't put oil in it or anything like that. So if there's a problem, I'll be able to get it solved. Yes, it's still in the air. Not on the ground yet. Idles down nicely. Let's see if we got any idiot lights on the dash other than the ones that it already had. Yeah, ABS and check engine. If I recall, this thing used to have codes for an O2 sensor, I believe. But as for right now, it's running, it's idling. It's got the same lifter tick that I know all of these usually have. Let's see what this is doing in here. It's a little low. I could probably add more. But again, the engine's still cold. Yeah, it runs, it lives, success, we did it. Oh, yeah. There we go. Yeah, there we go. That's probably just a bunch of oil and anti-seize that I spilled on the exhaust. Because, yeah, it was a little messy. Not oil, but oil from my hands and grease from the car and stuff like that. But anyway, I'm going to stop this here and top up the fluids and see if it moves under its own power. I haven't topped up the tranny fluid yet. I know it desperately needs some. But these things, like I said, I've never had a problem with the trannies, even when they're low on fluid. So, yeah. There we go. That's how you change a Neon engine in 2 days. Or 3 days if you're going really, really slow like I was. Take care, and keep your wrenches handy. One final one for you guys. Running great. Apparently the hydraulic adjuster on the lifter unstuck itself. But I noticed that it had a huge vacuum leak down here at the oil air separator, because this hose had rotted away. And unfortunately, the only hose I could find that would replace it is not nearly as flexible, so I couldn't get it in the right spot. And I'm not going to go to the dealership for one hose. So I just routed it like this, and it's working just fine. Apparently when I dumped the oil in the engine, somehow I got the exact right amount of fluid. But yeah, it seems to be running pretty good. As far as I know, that's normal for Neons, because that's what all of my Neons have always done. I mean, yeah, it's an older engine, but seems to be running good. So, yeah, that is the Neon engine swap.